we'll get the session going. The first session, Srivats is going to do the introduction and then followed by my thing and then Rajesh.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have amongst us eminent personalities, and we'd like to introduce Ms. Suguna. She's the Managing Director of Seeburger India Private Limited, which is a subsidiary of Seeburger AG, a company which has been into integration software and IT services since 1986. It has been transforming the IT landscape with its BIA suite, which is a fully cloud-capable, modularly built, integrated technology stack developed and supported entirely in-house. Suguna has 19 years experience in IT sector from development to managing firms, and she's done different roles. Her experience spans across industries which include automotive manufacturing, IT consulting, and services. Her core focus area has been B2B, EAI, MFT, API integration, digitization, business transformation, etc. She is very passionate about building strong and successful team and a strong focus on women, workforce participation, and excellence. We warmly welcome you, ma'am. Can you please have you on the dais? We also have our own senior partner, Mr. Rajesh Srinivasan. Rajesh heads the tax practice and has served clientele that spans across major industries, including automotive OEMs and component manufacturers. He serves as Deloitte India client service tax partner for multinational OEMs, both Indian and international ancillary manufacturers, and also supports the lead tax partners on other manufacturing accounts. With more than 25 years of professional experience, Rajesh specializes in corporate and international tax and has been recognized as leading tax controversy leader by International Tax Review for 4 years in a row now. Rajesh is a regular speaker at various tax conferences organized by international fiscal associations, industry chambers, etc., and is also a faculty at International Tax Post-Qualification Diploma Program of the ICAI. He is also a Raj Yoga practitioner with the Brahma Kumaris. We warmly welcome you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, Srinivasan. So a warm welcome to all leaders. On behalf of Institute of Internal Auditors, India Madras chapter and Deloitte India, I welcome you all for our special session on Union Budget 2023. So first I request Mr. Ravi, President of IIA India Madras chapter, to give us a welcome address.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. A warm welcome. And one of the instructions on the budget itself, this is a thing which we're doing year on year, but this is again back in vogue post-COVID. So we used to have it on year. And thanks for IIA support as well. Some of the topics which I just want to put to the chair, again, non-controversial. So one of the things I have to talk about a bit of IIA as well is we're doing a lot of skill development programs now, starting with the Tamil Nadu government. And I saw some special mention by the finance minister on skill development. So this is a joint program between Tamil Nadu government and the IIA Madras chapter. We are going to visit the colleges. We're starting to do some skill development with them, and post that help them with recruitment as well. So I was part of the program's visits the last 2 weeks. We've been visiting some Tamil Nadu government colleges, especially women colleges. It's a very unique program in a way that some of them don't have any exposure to any of these things. And part of the Tamil Nadu government Naam Udalvan scheme, there is a Tamil Nadu Skill Development Foundation which is working with us. And Uma Madam and Ranga Sir and Ram Kumar and Giri also is part of those programs. One of the unique developments when I visited some of these colleges was they were very good in English speaking. This is one question they were all asking me: how good are these colleges? Can we recruit? Interestingly, even our Deloitte does not visit any of these colleges, so I had to go through a lot of internal things to get the clearances done, because IA is a major step, which Ranga Sir signed the MOU with the government 2 months ago. So one of the big things which will happen again, if it all goes well, recruitment will also happen. Not only training, but year 3, it's first starting with the BCom colleges and then it will go to engineering colleges as well. And as you know, this is a big program for the government. This got presented in the G20 2 days ago when there was a seminar as well. So one of the basic things and requests as well, there are corporates out here, is to support some of these programs and also some thoughts also from a tax perspective. Secondly, when we read some of these news items, from an industry perspective, there's been a lot of things on inflation. So how is inflation going to be handled, especially one side we're seeing inflation and now the other side is the layoffs as well. And now AI coming into play, how are we going to really work with AI and now how does this impact as well? And thirdly, the whole deficit, etc., capital infusion, infrastructure, there's been a lot of announcements on the infrastructure as well. So how best the industry is coping up. So I have Paddu and I have Rangasar and I have also Ramkumar joining from Ashok Leyland. So they will throw some light on that. And other speakers as well. And feel free to stop the sessions because each of the sessions will have a break for 5 minutes on the question answer. 11:30 we will have a coffee break, followed by 11:40 when we start again. We have sessions on transfer pricing. Even though very short sessions, if you need more details, we can get back. But these are just thought-provoking sessions. And the final session is the industry session with all the eminent speakers. So these are 3 points, especially on the employability, which is our program. Also, IIA program is running big time into this. And if we see some of the colleges down south are also very interested. And the faculty training is also one big development. And national level also, we're starting to work with the Ministry of Education. Uma Madam is leading some of these efforts. So it will be very interesting to see how much of effort goes into some of this. It's a very genuine issue now. Employability is such a big issue, especially from the student population. So I just leave some thoughts here. Feel free to ask questions. End of the session, because this is going live. If you have any questions, you can feel free to spread the mic. There are too many questions we can't take because we need to close the session by about 1:15, 1:30. We have lunch also. You can join us for lunch. Lunch will be served in the 7th floor. Thanks once again, Madam. And all
More mic. So thanks, Ravi. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see all of you here. After a long time, we are having a physical meeting in our office. I think as Ravi mentioned, we used to have annual budget event before COVID. We used to organize in the hotels and we would have 700 attending conferences. Because of the virtual programs that are being organized, we are cut down on the physical meetings. So we want to keep this more as an interactive one. So we don't, many of you would already know the proposals that are there in the budget. It's more capital investment driven, right, and consumption enabled with no change in capital gains. Finally, I had to close it on tax, so no change in capital gains. That was a major anticipation before the budget. No, that. Hello. Knowing quite well that each of the change in the budget would have a consequence, would have an impact in the stock market. I think people would really know that any change in capital gains would be undertaken with a lot of caution, looking at the impact that would happen in the stock market. And may not be the right time to do, particularly being the last year of the full budget. So I think government has tread a very, I think, cautious path, making sure that they've reached out to all stakeholders and stayed away from controversial aspects, including disinvestments. That's one of the critical aspects to raise to raise money. I think that's not been mentioned. The other tactical one, what I had observed is that most of the funding from center to state is linked to the objectives that are set with the state, right? Either looking at the power sector reforms or looking at the taxes that are being, the state levies, the fiscal deficit that should be there at the state level. I think, I also think the the skill set is also part of that objectives that are being set. So the central funding would be made available only if these parameters are being met. Otherwise, you won't find states being so active in some of these areas. I think that's a very strategic approach that has been taken by government. I think each of the state government is now being pushed to undertake some reforms on power sector and also on the infrastructure. You would have seen a lot of investment happening in each state on roads and other areas. It's all linked to the urban capitalization that would be funded by the central government. I think a lot of things are happening, but it's not explained in greater detail. What is the contribution of state? What is the contribution of center? And how it's really being taken up. I think that's not clearly visible. That's a challenge I think the government might be having in explaining to people. And also there is some push in the case of automobiles by saying that the scrap policy would be implemented for government sector where they have control. They didn't want to make a full-fledged announcement around what public should be doing. I think that would be reserved for the future years, I guess. So if that had been made, then it would have given a significant boost to auto sector. But otherwise, at least some step has been taken where they have a control. They've announced that they would go ahead and do the scrappage of old vehicles. And then with regard to another expectation in corporate taxation, Chandra Prakash would cover that in detail. The lower tax rate of 15% that has been made available to manufacturing companies, which should be set up before 31st March 2024. There was an expectation that that period would get extended, but that has not really happened. Not sure what is the real intent, whether government wants to just stop this 15% rate available to people in the near future and just stay on with 22%. That seems to be the indication now. Some of the concessions that were being given, that has also been withdrawn. There no mention of it, particularly with regard to the ECB loans and rupee denominated loans, where there is a concessional ECB rate that has not been mentioned at all. It all seems to indicate that they would like to stabilize the tax rate at 22% plus the surcharge and cess, plus whatever concessions that are there, all of those would not be available at least in the next 1 or 2 years. It is subject to the changes. I think India as a country has really come through a lot of challenges in the past few years in an unexpected way, right? In a very positive way, we have come out quite well. I'm sure whatever stage we are in a sweet spot, and it seems to be the attraction for many of the investors from outside and also within India. Most of the investment is led by government today. I think we got to see whether there would be a private public participation going forward, except in the case of Air India, you've not seen much of action on the capital investment side. And whatever investment that's being made is essentially to generate employment. I think that's one way government is trying to address the employment related issues with huge investments going into the real sector, right? Then you would naturally see employment being generated. So we got to see, I think maybe Suguna might have a few things around software industry. It can be more interactive. So the questions can be posed to the audience and we can also get the response from them as well.
So I've spent 19 years in the IT sector, right? And whenever the budget is presented, everyone from the IT sector have only focused on individual taxation, because government tends to conveniently ignore the IT sector. Because most of the times, right, we are more dependent on what happens in terms of regulation, in terms of taxes in the US, in the Europe, right? So we are often conveniently ignored. But yes, right, from a startup mode and things like that, government is considerably invested, especially with the Startup India program, which promotes a lot of IT startups in India. India is still, right, the largest producer of IT services across the globe. So promoting startups in that area is definitely welcomed. I think as a part of this union budget, there were a couple of good changes with respect to startups. One is that the date of incorporation they have extended until 2024, which encourages more startups. And also, I think they have extended the period for carry forward of, which is also significant for startups to improve our liquidity. So it is good, but as I said, it is not enough for the IT sector. Most of the times we tend to assume that IT sector is well taken care of because of the assumption that we receive, right? Most of the people in our family are well paid, right? So we often think that there is no attention required. But there is a lot of attention required to a sector that is generating a lot of youth employment, right? And a lot of economic, right? So a lot of consumption, local consumption has increased, and IT sector, the increased pay in IT sector has promoted that. So there is a lot of regulation that needs to happen around this. As we see today, right? The big techs have all hired largely last year, and there is blood on the streets today, right? So there needs to be a clear message to the foreign investors, to the big tech companies, that our youth generation, right, who have just started their work life, right, cannot be demotivated by hiring and firing. So this is something that is a problem, that is a continuous problem in the IT sector. Right, so this is mostly left to the companies to figure out, but I don't think that is the right way to handle it, right? So especially when we are employing so much of millennial and Gen Z generation within IT, it would be very good, right, as a part of the next budget if this is regulated. So it's basically as me being an employer, right, I can tell you just merely bad planning in terms of how much manpower is required for the next few years if I go and hire too many. If I simply go by the hype created, we all know most hypes in the industry are short-lived, right? So with all this experience, I believe the IT tech companies could have done better, including company as well, right? In terms of planning, instead of hiring in mass and then firing. So if there is a law or if there are provisions that regulate this, this will largely help our young folks, right? Because this does psychologically, we all know the starting pay in IT quite significant. So when there is huge money in the hands of someone that is less experienced, and suddenly when that is lost, it does create a huge psychological impact. So we are creating considerable damage to young minds of India when we do this. So this is something that needs stricter regulation, and it is often foreign investors view Indian labor as easily exploitable. This is something that we often hear in the international forums. So I think that view should change, like what the European laws are, like what the US laws are towards employment. And we also, most of the laws around IT sector are mirrored from US, because US is the pioneer towards IT outsourcing. But we have to keep this in mind. Culturally, we are very different people compared to US. The Western side is more individualistic culture compared to us. We are more collectivistic, right? If something happens to me tomorrow, I lose my job, right? If I were to be in the US, it's just up to me how I take it. But if I'm in India, right, how my mother and father takes it, how my spouse, how people around the extended family, how they take it, whether I want to feel bad or not, they will make sure that I feel bad, right? So such aspects are there. So we simply not mirror the laws or the policies of US down to Indian folks. So this will not create healthy youth generation. And with us, I think in India, roughly the population, right, about 35 is around 65% of our population, below 35. So it is very important, right? We really, look at this matter, and really government intervenes into this. And there is also this concept of hybrid working that is now quite popular because of the pandemic, and that needs to be regulated as well as to what qualifies for a hybrid working. And now in special economic zones, extension is for working from home is only until December 23. So after that, what happens? Because working from home, this hybrid culture is both a boon and a pain, right? It is a boon for those who really are primary caregivers for the offsprings, right? But there are also disadvantages in terms of moonlighting, right? Where people tend to get exploited or else exploit the situation to do dual employments. As such, there are no clear laws around dual employment in India. So people tend to get exploited as well. Right? So for somebody says, I'll give you another 50% of a regular pay, and you can do this for 2 hours for me, especially our youth, right? Our young generation do get exploited, right? Because ethically, it is not correct. We're going to tell our younger generation that you can do anything, right? So that is something that culturally is not okay for us, because our societies are not driven just by money. We drive with a lot of values. So I think that is something that needs to be regulated to a larger extent. And then, I mean, we really welcome the investments into the AI space. But AI, if you take the Gartner's hype cycle, it is the peak of inflated expectations. We really don't know what or where we will end up with AI, right? So we are investing into, well, good and fine, but there are several technologies that we need to invest into, like the common digitalization. Have we standardized our digital formats like all other countries have done? See, today, we produce 60% of the demand of IT services from India, but most of it is shipped overseas only, right? For the digitalization of US, digitalization of the European economy, digitalization of the East Asian countries, right? But how much of digitalization is delivered locally here? Pretty much very tiny percentage or nil in certain cases, because we don't have standards for formats or electronic formats across industries. There are global standards, but they have not been adopted well within India. So if you take Walmart, right? So they know how to receive an order, how to send out a shipment information, how to get a remittance advice, how the payment flows. But if you take Reliance here, right, they are still struggling with digitalization. We still live on CSVs and customized solutions when we have the capability, right in our hands to digitalize this. There were attempts, I think there was an attempt between in automotive OEM and automotive tier association. A digital platform called AutoDX got launched, but there wasn't much of a benefit around it. They tried to commonize the formats, file formats for all automotive supply chain related interactions. But it did not pick up really well even within OEMs. So I think though if the industries try to figure out themselves, it is still not fruitful because there is no government regulation around it. Right? So in US, in Europe, industries decide something, right? It is generally for, at least that is the culture there, right? When large players in the industries come together and they put down a rule and they are able to adopt it. It works there. Unfortunately, because most of us look at government regulations, the guidance from the government to implement something. For example, the GST invoicing. Today it is a success story because it is driven by the government. If it was left for the players to decide themselves, I don't think we would have achieved the milestones that we have achieved today, right? So government came up with this and formats, right? The format of data, what type of data is required, where it is required, how it should be. So similarly, industry-wise, if government would push for adoption of global standards, I think a lot of digitalization will take place, which will improve the efficiencies, right, and will reduce errors, malpractices around that. And especially with Atmanirbhar Bharat, where we want the supply chain to be very resilient, information exchange is key to it. So supply chain, it's like goods exchange, money exchange, and then information exchange is one of the backbones driving the supply chain. So do we have enough supply chain visibility today? No, right? Because of the lack of data. So that is something that we, as I said, right? This is something that we ignore, right? Something that we produce in our land and we sell it across, but we are not the benefiters of that. Something that the widely available skill that is there in India, we are not the benefiters of that. So that is something that needs to be re-looked into, right? And the other aspect that I really looked forward for, I know Ravi said no controversial topics. But it isn't controversial. It's a topic that is there in day-to-day lives, right? So World Bank says this, right? It's a quote from World Bank. No country, okay, can develop and achieve its full potential if half of its population is left to do non-remunerative and non-economic activities. This is from their study about closing the gender gap in the workplace environment, right? So we have to ask these questions. Now, I'm not an expert in this topic, though I have strong focus and interest towards this topic, right? So have we invested enough into participation of women workforce in all our industries, right? And have we looked into the problems, right, of women workforce? Gender-wise, I mean, from a workplace-wise, men and women are equal, but men and women are not the same. Okay? They almost behave like two different species. If you would read Charles Darwin's book of Descent of Man, he almost says that biomorphism is so great in humans that men and women behave like two different species. So if we don't encourage participation, we're losing 50% of the skills in the industry, right? Because there is a way that a man approaches a problem versus how a woman approaches a problem, and we need both. It's like we need both the batsman and the bowler to play the game, right? Today it's more of batsmen only, right? So that needs to improve, and there was a lot of fallout by women workforce during the pandemic because of the burden, household burden, right? Because many people fell out, especially working mothers, because they are the primary caregivers. Culturally, we expect them to do so, but then we don't give them coping up mechanisms, right? So that needs to change. So because this is something that the government can look into, and with all this Amrit Kal and Saptarishi concepts that we build, Amrit Kal should be there, and if women participate in it, then by 100 years of independence, then we would have definitely grown. One other data that I want to quote around it, there was a McKinsey study in 2021 that says, if Indian women would participate in workforce like Indian men do, right, we will be 60% above the GDP growth that is planned by 2025. So that is something that we really have to take into account, and we have to encourage participation, prevent dropout, because it's not that they are dropping out because of non-performance or anything. It's just that they couldn't cope up. So we have to bring in workplace rules that allows them to cope up with the situation, right? And after emerging from the pandemic, we really have to look into those specific situations and start addressing them. So that is all I wanted to know. Hope it wasn't very controversial.
Right. Thank you for such interesting questions. I think each question would call for a separate session, so I don't think we can have that discussed. But a couple of points I would like to highlight. What we are observing in our firm and what we have learned from our clients also is that, see, today the women employment has really increased in the society. There's no doubt about it. It's happening at the entry level.
Yeah.
Okay, today if I look at our own hiring, we hire almost 50%, 50 to 50% at the entry level. And the number of chartered accountants who come out of the, who qualify, most of them would be women nowadays. Right? Because many of the men might be traveling overseas to taking up engineering, I guess. So, so what we are seeing as a trend is that I think middle level also, we find a lot of women being there. I think when you go into the leadership position, that's where we see a gap. Yeah. We are working towards achieving, bridging that gap, how we should be doing, what kind of effort that should be taken. I think somewhere during, as you mentioned, they are different, women are different, the responsibilities will be different. After a point in time, right, it becomes difficult for them to give full attention to work, and after a few years again they can come back fully into work. I think that's because of that reason they are not able to really fill the leadership position. And as far as our country is concerned, you know that ours really stands apart. We had women prime minister very early after independence, and today we have a finance minister, right, who is a woman, and there were a lot of objections to her. People were really we're skeptical, but I think done a fantastic job over the years. So I think as a country, we really look at women in a very different way. I think with a lot of respect and regard, and also the support that is being provided. And I don't think today they stand on their own. I don't think any support is also required from any of the organization. All of you have your own strength. Whatever position you enjoy today, it's based on your individual strength. I think that really shows that women can stand up on their own nowadays today. And I think some support should be provided in specific areas where we think there are gaps. There are certain government can do certain things, saying that they can create reservation 30%, 40%, but I don't know whether it would really make sense. But that's one area that can be looked at by government. With regard to IT industry, again, see this moonlighting vis-a-vis the hire and fire policy, it's also in a way linked for certain categories of employees. For example, people who are paid lower salary, a low amount of salary, right? If they are into the hire and fire policy, in order to protect their own interests, they got to do moonlighting, right? They got to look at another employment. I think that's one area it becomes very sensitive. But at a middle level, senior level, where the salary levels are much higher, I don't think they would go into the moonlighting area. I think that's, so it really depends on specific categories. And as a country, we wanted to move away from the governmental controls, right? We had a lot of red tapeism in the past. And only after 90s, we have really been moving away from the government controls. So there would be people who would say that we should not have government intervening in some of these areas. And labor reforms is one of the area where it's in relation to primarily manufacturing sector. They are expecting reforms around labor, giving them a lot more flexibility, because that would give them an opportunity to employ people when it's needed. Today they are too guarded when they got to employ. You know, people, a lot of companies don't set up operations in Europe, primarily because they are scared of hiring people in Europe. Even if you hire one person, and tomorrow if you want to close down that entity, you can't do it. It's so difficult to do. So that's why they don't set up operations in Europe. US, it's much easier to do. So there are a lot of practical challenges, and I think we would learn now going through the process. With regard to AI, there has been investment made. Government has taken a lot of steps on the financial side of digitization. I think if you look at banking, if you look at the information flow that's on direct taxes, indirect taxes, government has taken a lot of steps, but it's not on the operational side. Again, the question there would be that people would say that whether they would be willing to spend that much of money to streamline the process, because again, when you go into a very controlled setup, it calls for higher investment, right? Expenditure at each of the many of the companies may not be willing to do that. They would say that instead of spending money here, can I spend in R&D or can I spend in other areas? So we are developing. That's why we are still in that process. Hopefully, I think we would reach that stage soon. But overall, if you look at Apple, if you look at the Indian situation, Apple, which was not considering investment into India until 2-3 years back, today they are making substantial exports from India. I'm sure, I think things would change, and with capital investment happening, that's one of the reason government is pumping a lot of money into capital investment, which is still inadequate, right? Ours is only 3.3% as compared to more than 15-20% in developed countries. So we still got to make huge investment in physical infrastructure. We may not get returns from those physical infrastructure. I don't think when you look at metro, when you look at those areas where electric buses, the returns would be quite less for the government. So we got to find ways to also get returns for the investments that are being made. Today it's more for generation of employment and also creating a capacity and hoping that that capacity would create more economic activity. Very interesting questions. I think we would discuss that at the end also, some of these points, and take views from people around here.
Two or three questions.
First, I want to compliment both of you. Good presentation. Actually, I am a consultant doing a lot of work in Bangalore. The incident you have mentioned, you know, the Moog company, very pitiable. My junior, they suddenly said they're vacating totally. That fellow jumped from 13th floor. See, what you said is absolutely correct. But as he rightly said, we are very thankful. I don't want to bring any politics here. We are very thankful to the present Prime Minister in making the platform ready. So whatever you say, culture and other thing, our culture are changing now. All people are in a different format, different understanding. So it's growing in a right path. As he rightly pointed out, capital investment, we are doing it because I was a former director of a Coal India and a former chairman of Coal Mines Provident Fund. I have seen the other side, I am seeing this side. But definitely, whatever you have said, women are considered very important in our country, as he rightly pointed out. So it's not the way of your presumption. Because I am seeing in Bangalore, I am seeing in Singapore also, we have office there. As he rightly pointed out, some regulation and things you should copy down from Singapore for a better environment. See, they encourage research, they encourage things, they encourage. See, you see the country, it's a small town like a Mylapore. See how they are managing. See, that outlook slowly it's coming in now. So really I appreciate Ravi for inviting me for this. It's a wonderful meeting. I think very thankful to you. So thanks.
There are reports saying that Chinese are high net worth individuals from Chinese. They are all shifting to Singapore because that seems to be the most favorable location for them.
One more question. Rajesh, business tax, you can offer to have offline.
I want Ramesh to tell this experience now with your skill.
Okay. Thank you, madam.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll have direction.